Coffee and philosophy.
Just do it.
Oh shit, yeah, and I just realized they can't hear me. Okay, so yeah, blah 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 blah, all the shit I just said that nobody heard. True Girl's here, and yeah, so fuck it, let's do this thing.
Yeah, g'day. Double dingo babies tonight. And yeah, we'll see how we do.
Hello, hello. It's been a long time since I've been on.
Yeah, let's see. So yeah, so far on the agenda tonight we have Chu's going to take us on a spiritual journey through a whole bunch of ayahuasca trips. Cope's going to probably cook some DMT in his not crock pot because he hates those things, I just found out. And yeah, I don't know, man. I just got off of the wage cookery and here we are. So yeah, well, what's been going on with you, Chu? I know you've been living a busy life for the last year, and we haven't all been hearing from you too much.
Well, as you know, I don't typically come on this show because when I'm living in Panama, it's way past my bedtime. So Clay's wanted me to come on for a while to talk about my ayahuasca experiences. And I said, you'll have to wait till the end of the year when I'm back in Australia and in a grandma friendly time zone because it's now 3 o'clock in the afternoon here. So I'm not sleeping. Um, so yeah, so this year I've done quite a bit of ayahuasca. I've done 18 ceremonies, and then I've also been in Bali doing some spiritual work as well. So I don't know, maybe we'll talk about some of that. We'll see how we go.
Word. And what's up with you this week, Cope? You've been over there, doing the thing, fighting the good fight, and keeping on.
Yeah, man, it's the same old shit for me. Just do my thing, fight the good fight, and have a few drinks, as clearly I've posted. That's my drinking sponsors for today. They don't really sponsor me, but if you want to give me a sponsor, feel free. I'll take anything you're going to give me. But yeah, apart from that, not too much.
So you're drinking Ted.
Yeah, well, it's a beer. That's a beer. That's a
Word.
chilled. That's a
Is
chilled
it a
drink.
shitty New South Wales beer? It looks like it.
Well, it's not as bad as VB, but it is Tui's.
Yeah, I can see the Tui's label there, but then everything's owned by Tui's or Carlton Brewery these days, I think anyway. So, yeah.
Okay, guys, I just realized for audience support tonight, I think we're going to have to ask Alpha Chino Art to translate anything that's too overtly Australian for the for the lay people out there that aren't completely intimate with the intricacies of the Bogan dialect. Thank you.
Australian language.
Cope, we could have a bit of a state of origin going here. Queensland, New South Wales. That would be funny.
I'm not much of a footy fan anymore, to be honest. They lost me at
Well,
the Super
neither am
League.
I. But I was thinking, like discussing beers, for example. Yeah, there's the Queensland beers, it's the New South Wales beers. There's a lot of rivalry between the two states, even outside of football.
Yeah, unfortunately, when it comes to me, the whole rivalry thing it's lost on me. Like, it's very similar in a lot of the things that I'm into, whether it's building cars or beers or states or whatever. It doesn't matter what it is. I just find the whole conflict rather childish, right? Because like if we're into drinking beer, right, that brings us together. Why are we fighting if we're beer drinkers? Because there's plenty of people that don't like beer, right?
Well,
So
that's
this
true.
is what I
And
mean.
all
Like,
Australian beer, like it all tastes the same anyway after you've had three.
Yep. And then always it comes down to exporting the shit stuff. So the rest of the world gets Foster's because it's fucking shit.
Oh, here we go. See, that's good beer. That's German beer.
See, I had to go digging around until I could find this masterpiece throwback to back before I hugged Chew. So spoiler alert, I also hugged Chew. Don't let her tell you any different.
We've hugged in real life several times.
As long as there's consent, that's what it comes down to.
As long as there's what?
Consent.
Oh, consent. Yeah, you dropped out on halfway through there. But yes, no, there was consent. It was all good.
Yeah, there was no going around forcing hugs on people.
No, that would be bad.
Oh, no, but hey, I figured out the trick in Florida. See, what you do is you get a couple of beers in her, and then she'll hug you.
That's the
Why
price of a
don't-
hug.
I don't actually drink anymore. I haven't drunk since I was here this in January of this year. So I've gone the whole year without drinking alcohol. So,
You know,
there you go.
that's crazy.
That's
like,
bloody
I'm on the
un-Australian.
wagon. No, I only drink like basically tea and ayahuasca these days.
hey, I mean that makes perfect sense to me. And it's interesting because I don't think, other than like, I think I maybe like had a glass of wine once, but like I don't think I've even touched alcohol in probably like the last 5+ years. Like especially not to like get anything out of it. It's just interesting, but I don't know. I don't know if it's really a fair assessment because I can tell you like alcohol never really appealed to me. You know, I was definitely more of like the hard drug type of guy because whenever I was like trying to use any of this kind of stuff, I was always basically like looking for that escape, right? Like I wasn't like going for the let's have a good time, you know, get a buzz going, go hang out with the guys. Like that was never me. Like I always wanted to basically like dumb myself out to the point of like not, you know, having like all of my social anxiety and inhibitions and all of that bullshit. But yeah, and I mean, I'm glad to hear like you're staying away from it. You know, like obviously it's not hurting your life in any way. But yeah, I mean, I definitely want to get into like these ayahuasca trips. Like, okay, if I gotta go like one question, like what do you think is like the biggest like life changing thing that's come out of this?
Um, well, it's sent me on a spiritual journey, I would say. It's completely changed my life. So, yeah. Having believing in really nothing before, spiritually, very much in the atheist camp, to pretty much believing in everything now. Who's that? Who's the upside down name there? I
Well,
can't
it's
see.
anarchist.
Okay. Yeah, so it's been an interesting, very interesting year. I mean, I've blogged. I think I blogged 10 of them or 9 of them. I'm not sure. I didn't blog the last lot when I went to Colombia though, because that was like a bit more personal and a bit more of a like weird journey and involved other people. So I didn't feel blogging those ones. But like, I mean, people who've read my blog, they've seen the things that happened and the things I experienced on the first 9 or 10 journeys. So yeah, like it's just completely changed my life, basically. So feel
I
free
said,
to
do you want to
spread
like
that.
so like just give us a summary for those that haven't read you know your posts, so like the experience of the first 9 that you blogged about. What was the first experience like? What were you expecting? What did you go through?
Um, well, I sort of like I found out about it. I don't know when I was traveling in South America in I don't know around 2012 or something. But it wasn't really my time to take it. I think because ayahuasca she calls you, and when she calls you,
Mm.
like you just have to do it. Interestingly, she also tells you when to stop, which is where I am now. Um, but there was a YouTuber who I followed. She's a vegan YouTuber, and she started talking about going to Rhythmia in Costa Rica, and then she basically vlogged her experience and the things that she was feeling. it just really resonated with me. And I was like, oh God, like this is me. This is how I feel. Like I need to go. I need to go. And so this time last year, I had booked it, but it took me about 8 months to get in. And basically, Rhythmia, it's an expensive retreat that's set up to like basically introduce Westerners, mostly Americans and Canadians, that come there um, to ayahuasca. So it's a very like it's in a resort, so you don't have to go into the jungle. They're all English speaking staff. The shamans are all trained, at least 10, 12 years or something. But they're all Western shamans, although they do have Colombians come up, I think once a month or once every 6 weeks or something. Um, and so it's a very safe setting. So it really appeals to people, including myself at the time, who don't really know what to expect, are a little bit scared by stuff they've read about it on the internet, but and want the comforts that they're used to when they go on holidays. And so,
Mhm.
like, I don't think I would go back to that kind of retreat now, but I'm really glad that that's where I started.
Mhm.
Um, so
And how important do you sort of like think that the set and setting is on the experience?
Oh, I think it's very important. I think you need to be in a safe space, regardless. And this is why I would not do ayahuasca or yahe, as the Colombians call it, in Peru. I think there's like too much sorcery going on there, and there's just like a lot of dodgy stuff going on the back of all the ayahuasca tourism, because that is kind of where most people traveling in South America go to do it. I think there's a bit in Ecuador, there's a bit in Colombia. I know the Colombians are trying to build up their yahe tourism a bit, but I mean, the Colombians they still seem better. And if you do it in Brazil, you have to be a bit careful because it's like, what's it, the Santo Daime or something is kind of mixed in with religion. So I think it's not really sorcery, but there's a bit of dodginess that's going on there too. So you have to be really careful. So for me, it's been good because I live in Panama. And even though it's no longer legal, because they made it illegal about 2 years ago for various reasons, um, we get a lot of mostly Colombian titers that come up. And so now I'm on a couple of like private WhatsApp groups um, where I find out about all the ceremonies all the time. Like if I was in Panama, I could be sitting in a ceremony tonight because there's one on this weekend. Um, so you really have to be careful where you do it. And I because I know the people, like I kind of know the people who organize it now in Panama, and I trust them. And I've sat in ceremony with some of the titers that have come up. Like I feel very comfortable doing it in Panama with those titers. And yeah, because of what I've heard about Peru mostly and the sorcery that goes on. Because you are giving your power over to, firstly, a plant spirit, and secondly, to a shaman. So you want to be in a safe space, and you want to be somewhere that if you go somewhere bad and you can't get out yourself, that there's people there that can help you get back and feel like. And I think that was the problem when they banned it in Panama. There was a Tida, he still comes up, like he comes up once a month. And he ran a ceremony, and there was one person who committed suicide after sitting in ceremony with him, and somebody else who tried to. So you have to be really careful because well, these things can literally end in death if you sit in the wrong ceremony. So I'd say it's really important where you decide to drink it, and I would never suggest that anybody drink it on their own.
This is kind of making me think of something that like I've heard plenty of times, and it's basically like when the wrong person uses the right means for the wrong reason, like you get bad results, right? Like just having access to like certain knowledge or like certain tools in this case. I think this kind of like ties in a little bit with what we were talking about last week, Cope, with like the fake gurus and like the people that are just trying to like get rich off of other people's kind of like quest or journey for like self awareness, spiritual enlightenment, these things. I mean, what you're calling sorcery, I mean, I don't know. That's not like a word I would use, but I mean, I think that like I can think of plenty of examples of people that like use the right tools, the right information, but they very much use it for the wrong reasons. Like is that kind of like where you're going with that? Like they're doing it in like bad or negative ways.
No, I'm talking about actual sorcery and shamans doing bad things to you while you're under the influence of ayahuasca. But I mean, that could be something as well. But the only reasons I've heard, the people I've heard that shouldn't take it are people, if you've got some kind of heart problem, because it does speed up your heart. And what was the other one? Oh, if you schizophrenic, but everything else is pretty much okay, from what I know. And I'm not a doctor, so don't, quote me on that.
Yeah, I'm not a doctor, but I play one on TV, so you guys should be fine. So what about you, Cope? You any thoughts or questions on that?
No, it's running good as far as I'm concerned. You can keep going, Chew, with your experience.
Okay, so I mean, there's two things I think that you get from ayahuasca. The first one is um, it sort of cleans out your shit, and by that I mean most of us, well, all of us, things happen in our lives, traumas, whatever. They don't have to be big ones; they can be small ones, and we kind of push stuff down and push it down. It's like I don't want to deal with that. I don't want to. And ayahuasca kind of comes in and goes, "Oh, what's this?" And then like just pulls it out of you and makes you deal with it. Um,
Hmm.
so that's why they say it's like 10 years of therapy in one night because you just deal with all your shit. And I guess it's like an onion as well. Like the more you do it, kind of like the deeper the layers you go. Um, and so you see a lot of people, I mean, there's a lot of purging that goes on. And generally, they say if you're vomiting, which everybody does, it's emotional purging. There's always a lot of crying. There's a lot of weird sounds. There's a lot of shitting. There's just, yeah,
Mm.
you wouldn't do it. It's not a recreational drug. Like it's a medicine, and you have to treat it with respect as such. But the other thing that it does is it can teach you. It's a teacher, and for me, most of my experiences have been teachings, um, and I tend to have like it's been very energy focused. So, like, I can see energy, I can see, like, literally see energy in the air, I can see different frequencies, I can feel energy. I've had a Kundalini awakening twice in while on ayahuasca. I've been able to pull energy out of people. I've been able to see the energy connections between me and people. Like it's really quite incredible. And then she's taught me a lot of things around that. But yeah, and they're kind of the main ones without going into sort of the dark
So,
stuff. Colombia.
so let's talk about like the onset, because like there's a pretty big difference between like smoked dimethyltryptamine and when you have it when it goes through the endocrine system through your stomach and that kind of thing. There's some stark differences between the two. Now, when you smoke DMT, it's kind of like the bungee jumping version of sort of like interacting with this material. So the onset is sort of like 10 to 20 seconds. You blast off pretty quick, and you have like 20 minutes max if you, depending on sort of like how you're doing. If you're doing it sort of like the crystal method, then you're talking like 5 to 10 minutes. But if you're doing things like mixing it with plant materials and creating a changa, that kind of thing, we're talking about like 20 minutes, 25 minutes. Whereas the ayahuasca experience is somewhere in the mark of between 4 to 8 hours, depending on who makes it, where you're getting it from, that kind of thing. And instead of being sort of like a blast off kind of thing like smoke DMT, it's kind of like a soft onset, and things sort of like start warping. And I think the comparison that was made to me is kind of like bungee jumping versus being lifted to the heavens on a feather kind of thing. So I wanted to sort of like ask you about that experience of like the onset. So you had the brew, and you're sitting there waiting for it to kick in, and tell me about when you started feeling it, and sort of like what it felt like going through that to reaching the peak of the experience.
Yeah. I mean, I haven't taken any of the other ones, so I haven't done any like Bufo or anything like that. So I mean, I can get hold of quite a few of them in Panama, like the plant medicines and also Bufo, which is a animal spirit one. Um, yeah. So for me, typically, I've needed 2 or 3 cups, and when I say cups, they're only, I don't know, like maybe 2, 3 centimeters of actual liquid. That's not like like a big mug of tea or something. Um, and so generally there's only been one time where I've taken one and it's pretty much kicked in straight away. And I think that was on the second, yeah, it was on the second night anyway. So I already had it in my system. But generally, if I take one, I don't really feel anything. And then it's hard to know what the time is though, because you're not allowed to have phone there, and I don't wear a watch. So you kind of have to sort of guesstimate. So I would say they usually call second drinks after maybe half an hour, 40 minutes, something like that. And then I think usually after the second one, it then maybe takes 10, 15 minutes for it to start to kick in. And for me, I can tell it's kicking in because I start getting, like, I get very strong visuals on ayahuasca. And like I just start seeing things. Not so much sacred geometry. A lot of people just like see sacred geometry and that's it. And they kind of get stuck in this loop of sacred geometry. And I haven't really had that experience. Like, it's hard to explain. It's just like just stuff from the universe just coming at me, and I start to see stuff. And this is with my eyes closed. So if I need a break, and if I open my eyes, if like I'm back but then generally at its peak, like sometimes it depends how I feel. Like if I don't feel much after 2 cups, I might go up for a third. It really depends. Because it's not like taking alcohol where the more you take, the drunker you get, like, or anything. It's not like that at all. Like you remember everything. Like, well, not everything in that. So much information is
Hmm.
being downloaded to you, but like you remember the experiences. There aren't periods where you're like, oh fuck, I blacked out and I can't remember, like falling over and doing this, that, and whatever. Like you do remember everything that happens. And so it just kind of depends. Like sometimes you need an extra one, sometimes you don't. But I find like when it really kicks in, when I know it's at its peak, there's really no escaping the visuals. So it doesn't matter if my eyes are open or closed, like I can see exactly the same thing. And that's when I know, okay, I'm like, this is the peak. And I have no idea how long that lasts, to be honest. I don't know, because I'm not in a position at that point to be going, oh, I wonder how long this is lasting, because you're
Yeah.
in it. And sometimes it's good. And then other times you're just like, oh my God, like I need a break. And all I can see is, I don't know, whatever you can see. And
Yeah.
it'll pass. Like everything, it'll pass. So you just kind
Mm.
of have to go with it. Um,
Yeah.
but yeah, generally one doesn't do it for me. There's really, although I think one of the ones in Colombia, it was like a super strong brew because they
Mm.
didn't have to bring it in to Panama. And so I think it could be, I don't remember what they did. They did the brew slightly differently because it didn't have to go on a plane, kind of hidden. Um, and that was like really strong. And I think we got a bigger cup, and pretty much all of us just only needed 1 cup that night, and we were all like gone.
Yeah. Well, yeah. The thing is with the using the older methods, it's less accurate because of like clearly the plant has different materials, and, different levels of dimethyltryptamine in it. How much you actually put in there, and it all comes down to basically the recipe and how it's done. And this is kind of like why, for me, my experiences have been more with smoked dimethyltryptamine because, well, number one, I'm in control of like what it is. Like, so the material itself is extracted because you don't make it. You extract it. It's already there. You're just basically taking everything else away and just leaving what you want there. And you can actually measure out your dosage to the milligram, and it's a bit more accurate as far as I'm concerned. And on top of that, I don't want to like lose control of myself for like a number of hours. It's just not something that I feel comfortable with. Just with my environment, people may come around and that kind of thing. So the whole bungee jump thing is good for me. 20 minutes in and out, job done. But just speaking to this point you were saying about having too much. Through the processes that I've been through and the people I've interacted with, there's people that have gone too far with it, and it's not that it's a blackout situation where you're just like, oh man, I don't know what happened and I passed out kind of thing, but it's kind of like I had all of this experience coming in and then suddenly I just hit nothing, and I have like I know that something happened, but I don't know what happened, and I bring no message back from my experience, which is kind of like that's not what you want. You don't want to go into this experience without being able to take something away from it, kind of thing. And I think this is more to something else that you were speaking to a little bit earlier, Chu. Was you're told when to stop, kind of thing, and it's not by you; it's by a higher power, by Mother Ayahuasca, by the alien beings, by the lizard people, like whoever you interact with on the other side there. And this one person was basically saying that because they were abusing the material, that when they took the material, they would no longer have anything. So they'd go through the initiation, through the onset kind of thing, and they'd feel it coming on, which is kind of like going through the ego death and that kind of thing, the bad stuff that you have to go through before you get to the euphoria. And this person was saying that basically like they went through the whole ego death process, but then when they got to having the experience, they weren't allowed to have the experience because they were abusing the material. They weren't using it correctly, etc. So they were kind of like locked out of the experience, and they had to leave it alone for a while and come back to it later. So
Is this in the one in the over and above ceremonies?
well, and again, keeping in mind that it's the way that we're doing is less ceremonial in the sense of like with all the official stuff. It's we've got people that are watching over each other. We have a particular process. I mean, you could call it a ceremony, but it's nothing like air quotes official. So essentially, what we do for our experiences is we make sure we create a safe environment where people are comfortable. We make sure that they've got everything they need, whether it's a drink of water, some bread to eat, like whatever they may experience, we're kind of like prepared for it. They choose their music, usually about 5 or 6 tracks, because it's how long the experience is going to take. And then we have like the watchers sort of like make sure that the person's okay. So they're breathing okay. They're not sort of like laying in bad positions and that kind of thing. So I mean, you could call it a ceremony, but it's more just like a experience by one's own design, if you will. So this person was doing these processes with us, but at the same time, they were also going off and doing their own thing whenever they wanted to all the time. Like they had their own stash, if you will, and we're just doing it consistently every day, just doing it. And the beings that this person was interacting on the other side just said enough. Like you're not getting anything out of it. So you can have the ego death, right, which is the bad part of the experience. Well, it's not that it's bad. It's just it's something you need to recognize. So go through the ego death, and then when you get to actually having the experience, the person was not allowed to have the experience in the same way they were before. So they just had nothingness, like a 0 point, like just being in a black room is essentially what they described. And then they came back to, and they're just like, I didn't get anything. So it's kind of like this material is alive and interacts with you in a particular way. So if you're abusing it, it will tell you no. It can tell you no.
This is
That's interesting.
this is kind of making me think of something too, that I'm definitely a believer that these materials basically kind of like facilitate maybe like I mean, I obviously feel like they're tools, like they're designed for this purpose. I don't think it's exclusive to just DMT. I mean, I think psilocybin, for one, is definitely useful in this area, and I think to some extent LSD is too. But I guess like I would say like one of the questions I would have for you is like seeing the way some things are going. Like currently there are there's like actually a company LP was talking about that they are basically like creating microdosed psilocybin coffees and teas, like stuff like that for people that are just like your day to day average, like person that just wants to kind of like, tip their toe in the water. But I mean, honestly, like I really feel like these are the kind of things that we should be using to help kind of like with one mental health, but also to like kind of like help people gain that level of self-awareness, kind of like go down this road to maybe like I don't want to say like leading like a more like natural lifestyle, but like kind of maybe like going away from some of the things that we currently see today in society, maybe like moving a little way away from greed, kind of like maybe I'm growing, like compassion, some kind of sense of connection with the rest of the humanity. And I guess what do you think it's done for you personally? I guess I could say like mental health wise. Like, do you feel like it's created like some big changes, like maybe like stepping away from the spiritual to more just like your mental health? What do you think?
Well, I didn't really have any mental health issues to begin with. Um, but it has helped me understand some of my thought patterns and behaviors, definitely. Um, and I did have to confront some of my shadow self um, in Colombia, which I kind of wasn't expecting, and I didn't really realize until afterwards. So yeah, that was interesting, and now it's made me a lot more aware of, I guess, my thoughts and how I'm thinking. But I mean, I guess, and as a result, as a result of kind of getting on the spiritual path, it has made me happier. But it wasn't a mental health issue. Like I didn't go in with depression or anxiety or PTSD or anything like that. I just wanted to do it because I don't know, I guess I was unsatisfied with some things in my life. And when I heard this YouTuber talking about her experiences, like she seemed to be, going through some of the things in her life, just being unsatisfied with some of the situations, and it had helped her. And so I guess that's what I got. The shadow self is basically, we live in a dualistic universe, well, not universe, dimension. So we think of things black, white, good, bad, um, you know moral, immoral, whatever. And the shadow self is just those parts of you that they make up who you are, and but they might not be the parts of you that you like or advertise about yourself. So, for example, things like judgment, things like, what else? Like selfishness, those kind of human characteristics which we all have. And generally, some are more developed than others. And I guess it goes along with the ego as well. It just highlights some of those characteristics that you don't necessarily you if you don't know about the shadow self, then you might not even know that they're shadow characteristics. And it just it kind of shows you what they are and makes you confront them. So I have had some of that, which I think has made me like a better person as a result of having to face some of that. And it's not about getting rid of them. It's about sort of integrating them and bringing them out of the shadow.
Hmm. I think it's about acceptance of the self. I think that that's one of
Yeah,
the main things
exactly.
that we sort of like take away from these experiences is like because even though like there's there's a couple of ways of looking at it. I mean, there's the experience itself, which is like there's a bunch of colors and you can see the music and you can like taste the sounds and like all this crazy shit happens, right? But that's kind of like something that you go through, but what you take from it is what these things mean to you. And this is something that I've sort of like related to a few times. It's like when we try and translate our dreams, a lot of the times only we understand particular things. So if you look through like a dream book, they'll tell you that water is bad. If you see yourself in water, it means turbulent times and you're trying to keep your head above water and that kind of thing. And it's bullshit, right? Like a book can't tell you what your dreams are about. You can tell yourself what dreams are about. So say for instance in my life I was a water baby, right? So I learned how to swim before I could walk. So essentially like me being in water in my dream, I love it. It's not scary for me, right? So this dream interpreting is incorrect. And it's the same kind of thing with these experiences. Like you may see something that others may find horrifying or terrifying, but for you it's something that it means something different to you. So what it comes down to is analyzing the experience, like what you do bring back. Because, like Chu was saying, like you get like it's like the universe downloads its entirety into your brain for just this small, insignificant moment in time, and then it takes it all away, but it leaves little fragments on the disk drive of your brain. And during this process, what you need to do is go through those fragments that are left and decipher what that means to you. And a lot of the times, what you find is like what you were saying there is like this shadow self is also kind of like translated to things like the darker side of yourself. Like, and if you've ever cheated on somebody, like that you were cheating and you didn't want it. Like cheating ain't good. It's not going to make people feel good, but you did it anyway, right? But somehow you find a way to justify it to yourself, right? You're going to have to deal with that, right? The person that you picked on in high school, right? And it's a memory that's so far back in your brain you don't even know that it's there. It's so far back, so deep, so buried, you know that is going to come to the surface and you're going to have to really like stand face to face with yourself, right? Because that's the thing, you don't have to answer to anybody but yourself and tell yourself like about all the lies that you made up to justify that behavior, to make sure that you could sleep at night by doing these things and then going, okay, well, now what I'm going to do is just bury that. Well, unfortunately, in this scenario, right, and this is what we're referring to as ego death, right, which I think it is anyway. These things come to the surface, and you need to face these things. You need to address these things and make sure that you understand what you did, and not so much as being like you have to go make an apology to the individual that you bullied when you were in high school, but understand that this is part of who you are as a human being, and it's normal for people to do these kinds of things, but you have to accept it. Don't deny it, accept it. And once you actually have that acceptance, that's the end of the ego death section of this experience. And then you sort of like carry on forwards from there. And, you have a bit of a psychedelic experience. You get to see the universe, that kind of thing. But it can present itself in a number of different ways. So that's my take on it, at least anyway. What do you reckon, G?
Well,
Am I on the
Yeah, I
money?
mean,
I just want to throw this out there because I think it's interesting that it sounds like we've all three had these experiences, and look, like I'm not completely ignorant of psychedelics. Like I've had my experiences. I've done plenty of altering substances, but I find it interesting that like when I had my what I think a lot of people call like the quote unquote like dark night of the soul. I wasn't on any, and but still, like I feel like this is an experience that will find you if you need it. You know what I'm saying? Like maybe it shows up in the like some like some of your friends are doing some DMT and you like you casually try it. I can't tell you how it shows up in your life, but I feel like if you need to have this experience, you're going to have it. Like. It sounds very like fatalistic, but one thing that I guess like come to understand, like breaking down the duality and everything, is that everything basically is connected, right? Like whether you want to say like everything happens for a reason or not, I don't know. But what I can say is I don't believe it's all chaos anymore, right? Like I totally feel like I was probably more like Chu in the sense of like I didn't really believe in anything, like to me it all fuck, dude, like I couldn't give a shit about anything at that point, right? And then I had this experience, and it like literally, I'm basically an entirely different person now, right? Like it made me like completely like honest assessment of myself. It made me face down everything. I mean, I think there's probably like 100,000 words or more of just posts of me working through this kind of bullshit, right? And I mean, I say bullshit, but I mean, like, if you could read them, I mean, I'm talking about like all of my issues with myself. I had to work through them. And I can tell you, like, I used to be that person that had to put on like the fake persona. I had to convince everybody that I was something I wasn't. I had to do all of this because like I literally could not fucking stomach myself. Like I hated everything about myself. I hated who I was. I just everything about me was fake as can be. And it's interesting, right? Because like I wasn't looking for this experience. I didn't even know it could exist. I didn't even believe in it. But lo and behold, I had it. And I just found it interesting, right? Because it doesn't really matter how you got there or like how the experience came to pass. I just find it really interesting that we can all have these like so much similar experiences, if that makes sense.
Mm. Yeah, look, I agree with you when it comes to the whole, this thing finds you when you're ready. I've talked to quite a few people in regards to this because, for those that don't know, I was interested in studying this on a scientific level previously. I've since abandoned that venture, but anyway, um, so from the people that I've talked to about it and the way that they've sort of like come across it, there's people that were hunting it for years, like for years and years and years. They couldn't find it. They couldn't extract it properly. They found all these like means of trying to interact with it, and it was almost at the point where they were just like, well, it's just not going to happen for me. And then bang, it happened, right? And during the process of their experience with the material, they were told that the journey to find it was fine, but they weren't going to experience it until they were ready, and they weren't ready, right? Up until the point when they actually had it. This is one of the things that can be somewhat soothing for those that are sort of like looking for this experience and trying to hunt it down and etc. It can be a little bit nerve wracking when you first consider doing it, as in like you're faced with it, like you're going to drink the brew or you're going to smoke the smoke or whatever it is that you're doing. But just know that when you do interact with it and it works, because there's been plenty of times where people have tried to have an experience with it, but because they haven't done something properly, etc., they think they're going to have the experience and they don't have the experience, kind of thing. When you do have it, it's at the right time. And this can be like, a synchronicity kind of thing and the universe talking to the self and that kind of thing. So it gets a little bit woo woo and a little bit spiritual. But you will have the experience when you're meant to have it. That's about as much as I can tell you. Like, so, you know, if that can sort of like calm your nerves and keep that in mind, like when you have the experience, it's at the right time and it's
I
going to be okay.
I would add to that as well. I mean, the people that I've seen that don't um, get the experience they want is usually because they are trying to control it. And ayahuasca gives you what you need, not what you want. So
Hmm.
I find that when people kind of just like give in and decide to just go with whatever is supposed to happen, like that's when they get an experience, as opposed to nothing happened, I'm wasting my money, blah 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 blah, having journey envy, whatever. And it's like, well, what were you doing? Were you trying to tell the ayahuasca what to do? Because that's not going to work. So yeah, I would add that as well.
Yeah, well, I've talked to a few people that have had quite negative experiences because they were trying to control the experience. So they had the onset come on, and they were still trying to cling to control. And this is one of the things that we need to understand is like you're handing over control. Like you are sort of like doing the control alt delete for the brain. And that means you have to let go of the control that you have for a while. Now that's uncomfortable for a lot of people. Now, me myself, I'm a control freak too. Like I can understand that. But I know in this given situation that holding on hurts more than letting go. So when I have the experience, I do feel that need to hold on, but then I kind of like in my brain I go, let go, just let go and just have the experience. And that's when like the ego death for me finishes. Like when I manage to let go, that's when my real trip experience happens, and I start gaining information and interacting with beings from other universes and different levels and planes of existence and all the crazy cool shit that you hear people talking about. But I've also seen people that when they go into it, they don't want to let go, and they're trying to keep their conscious mind when they have to actually release it. And that's when we usually start seeing adverse effects. So people start having, air quotes, bad trips because they try and maintain that control. So it can have adverse effects if you try and hold on. So anything to take away from the situation, just let go. Just let go.
I would say that. Let go, let go, let it go, let it go.
But just speaking to Bear's comment here in regards to we produce DMT naturally. Yes, we do. That's kind of like, but it's a little bit of a mystery. We're trying to figure out exactly where it comes from, and on the science side of things, that is. Like we're assuming it's in the pineal gland, and it's associated with things like creating the dream stage, like. When you go to sleep and you dream, and there's like crazy shit happening, there's dragons and there's all this crazy shit that you can make up in your dream state. It's what is associated with those kinds of things. However, to have the breakthrough experiences that we're talking about here, that needs to be much higher than what you have in that general dream stage. Now, we can induce this by doing meditation. We can stop eating food and getting enough sleep. That can also do the same kind of thing. And what we also find in the sciences, that is, if we analyze the urine of people with schizophrenia, they have higher rates of dimethyltryptamine within the urine, which means within their body there's more dimethyltryptamine, which kind of like accounts for you think people with schizophrenia, they're hearing voices and they're seeing things and that kind of stuff, and it kind of like makes a little bit of sense. But what we're getting at here is there's no real way to just flick the switch and take yourself to this realm of empathy, compassion, and understanding, and not for others but for the self, right? Because we're trying to understand the self. So it really comes down to how can we have that experience where like Chu was saying, like a non-believer of anything and just like whatever kind of thing goes through this and just goes like, holy shit, now I've changed my life because of this experience. Like that's rare, right? For some people, and like Clay was saying, you need to have near-death experiences. You have to take a really good look at yourself, and people don't want to do that. So how can we have this experience easily, right? It's not something that we can do easily unless you want to spend years learning how to meditate properly and sit on the top of a hill under a tree and become one with the universe. Like people don't have time for that shit. You got to feed the kids, you got to go to your job, that kind of thing. So how can we have that experience? And this is kind of like a shortcut, as what's said there. It's a shortcut. But for those that are searching for these kinds of things, it's a good means of interacting with the self and understanding the self, I think.
I would add as well, I've heard that when we're born, like the moment of birth and the moment of death, like our bodies are flooded with huge amounts of DMT as well.
Yep.
So
yeah, I've read that as well.
And and this is one of the reasons why it's not an addictive drug, because it's something that we naturally produce in our bodies. So, people don't get addicted to ayahuasca,
Yeah.
like
Well,
it doesn't happen.
And the other thing as well is the thing is because we have dimethyltryptamine in the body just naturally. If we put dimethyltryptamine into the body, so if we took the ayahuasca brew, right, with just the DMT part of it, nothing can happen. We metabolize it. It's like, yep, no problems. We can handle this. We break it down, and you don't have any experience whatsoever. What we need is the MAOI, which sort of like helps us sort of like take that in a different way, right? And that's when we have this psychedelic experience, right? So there's a lot of things that need to actually like line up for us to have this kind of experience with the material. So which is something that leans back to like, how did we figure this shit out so many thousands of years ago, right? Because we're talking about like shamans and stuff like that sort of like figured this shit out back in the day. And not only did they figure it out in South America, but it's all over the world. I was just saying earlier before we jumped on air to Chew that the Australian Aboriginals have a brew that utilizes the acacia, which is essentially the same thing. You may as well just call it ayahuasca. It's another means of doing so. Then in Asia, China area, the same kind of thing. All through the Americas, all through Europe, like where you can find the acacia, you can find this kind of brew. So it sort of like begs the question is, how did we figure this out, and how did we all have this kind of like interaction with this material? And the outcome of these kinds of things, we were talking about the flower of life, which is part of the whole sacred geometry and stuff that you see when you have the experience, which has been sort of like, it's part of history. Like you can look through Egyptian temples, and they have the flower of life inscribed in some of the pillars on cave walls in Australia. The food dogs in China, like their paws are resting on the flower of life, right? Etc. 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 So what it says to me, at least anyway, because it's my perspective, is that when we go through these experiences, we kind of like, we see the same kinds of things, but the meaning that we take away from it could be different. But we see the same things, and isn't that just strange?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of like indicative of the fact that, just like what you're saying, like how it's kind of found everywhere in like all of these different like shapes and forms, like including naturally produced into your own body. I mean, to me, it seems like by design, it's very much there, right? Like there's no coincidence here. This isn't something somebody cooked up in a lab. Like this is, like something your body naturally produces. And I mean, arguably, again, we can't really science this out because we don't really have the tools or technology yet. But I mean, I think it's very much there for a reason, right? Like whether it's whenever you're dreaming, like when you're asleep at night, whether it's whenever you die, whether it's whenever you're born. Yeah, I mean, I feel like this molecule totally exists for a reason. And I definitely don't feel like there's any kind of coincidence with the fact that people have learned how to like work with it over time. And I mean, we could even get into like, like stoned ape theory, like if you want to go down the evolutionary trail there. But, basically like monkeys eating psilocybin mushrooms and evolving consciousness. I mean, it's just interesting stuff, right? Like, it kind of like feeds into the theory that none of this stuff happens really by chance.
I think that, my perspective on how, like, Amazonian shamans in particular, out of, however many million Amazon, and okay, these are the two you need to mix. I think it comes from, like pre sort of, I don't know if it's modern history, but people were a lot more spiritually connected, and people probably just journeyed without any kind of plant enhancements, and they got this information like directly from source. So I mean, that's how I think they got it.
Well, I mean,
It's from the spirits themselves.
I think that makes a lot of sense. Like honestly, like look at what life was like back then, right? Look at what life's like today. We literally have every excuse that like I could even theorize, and like every tool to our disposal to stop us from doing exactly that, right? Like we have everything to distract us from who we really are. We're now getting further and further into all of these tools to keep us from having like, like one-on-one, face-to-face, real-life communication with other human beings. And, yeah, I mean, I don't think it's really any coincidence looking at the current state of our society, like the way things are heading, like all of this violence, all of this, just people like having no compassion, empathy, or understanding for each other. I don't think it's a coincidence, man. Like I don't believe in coincidence, but I mean even beyond that, I mean so much. It feels like we're intentionally leading ourselves away from this like mystical type experience, right? And like I don't know if we can like say that that's due to like the underlying human need to control everything, or maybe if there's something more to it, right? Like maybe there's an agenda behind it, and there's people that don't want us doing this because it makes us not, quote unquote, like good slaves, right? Like we don't want to comply and play the game if we're aware of all of this shit, if we can see through the game,
Well, I think it's more about the fact that like a person who is sort of like self-actualized doesn't give a fuck about anything else, right? And I don't mean that in like a negatory way, but like, I kind of like recall going through high school, and many of us may have the same experience where, like you looked around at the other kids and they had, most of the kids were wearing Nikes. So you wanted to wear Nikes, right? Because like you wanted to fit in, you want to be part of the crew, you want to be part of the crowd kind of thing. And that's seen as a good thing. You want to be like everyone else, right? So be another drone, right? Be another person pumped out of that mold. And that's because, we want to have that social interaction and all those kinds of things. And it's kind of like when we look at TV, when we look at the government systems, when we look at the schooling systems, we look at everything. It's kind of like, conform, consume, do what we tell you kind of thing. Whereas like a person who goes through these kinds of experience goes, you know what, like, fuck this shit. Like, I don't want to be like everyone else, right? Like, I want to do my own thing. I don't want to be, air quotes, normal. And that is a threat to, of course, these systems, because if people start doing their own thing, they're no longer reliant on these systems. Kids aren't going to be going to your standard schooling system anymore, which a lot of people have plenty to say about the schooling system and what it does right now. And of course, that means losing money, losing revenue, etc. So, I think a lot of the times because let's just be clear here, right? Psychedelics, right, which have the least amount of damaging capabilities to individuals. So if we're going to sort of like do a number for number measurement on these kinds of things, this is empirical evidence, right? This is scientific shit, right? I'm not making this stuff up. You are more likely to die from aspirin than you are from dimethyltryptamine. From nicotine, that's pretty clear, right? Caffeine, right? You're more likely to overdose from caffeine than you are from dimethyltryptamine. From even like we start talking about marijuana, the cannabis, right? The pot, not even once. One injection of cannabis will do it to you. This is why it's Schedule 1, right? Not because it can actually damage your body, but because it can free your mind enough to be able to break free from the chains and go like, well, like I'm not interested in partaking in this bullshit anymore. And I think that's what these groups are scared of. Not so much that it's going to actually harm the body, because when we really look at it, the pharmaceuticals are actually more damaging to humans than any of these psychedelics are.
Agree with that. But I mean, with or without psychedelics, I think a lot of people are starting to wake up to these systems of control that have been in place on our planet for a long time now and are starting to reject them. So regardless of whether you want to take ayahuasca or whatever, I think we are starting to move away from that, and hopefully we will continue to do so.
Yeah, I mean, I think it definitely raises a lot of questions, right? And in my mind, I think that's probably one of the most important aspects, right? Like, one, it gets you questioning your own beliefs and breaking them down and figuring out what's real and what's not real. But, two, like, it also gets you questioning, like, all of your assumptions and expectations about how you think everything has to be, right? Like, the whole, I have to go get a 9 to 5, and, I gotta go shit out the 2.5 kids and get the picket fence, and, like, it frees your mind to the extent that not only do you see past your own bullshit, but you see past all of it. And to me, I think that's where it really kind of like gets into like the game-changing territory, right? Because instead of, I mean, so much of this is about the personal experience, like don't get me wrong, but I mean, I feel like on the whole, like collectively, there's something bigger happening. And, I try not to really speculate too much on what it is or what it could be, but I mean, I think like on some level I have to like at least say it at least looks like on the whole it's like a shift in society, like whether we want to call that like a paradigm shift, whether we want to call that like a self-correction, like maybe we've strayed too far from like, whatever we're supposed to really be doing here. And I mean, look, like I'm all for, like scientific advancements and all of that kind of shit, but I mean, if it gets us away from like our purpose, if it makes us miserable, if it, like, and look, like, yeah, some people, they are at least convinced that they find some kind of joy in that stuff, but I mean, collectively, I think there's a lot of people that just exist just to exist, if that makes sense, like keep doing things you don't want to do just to keep doing things you don't want to do because you think you have to do them. Like whether it's like some kind of self-imposed belief that, well, I mean, as self-imposed as any of it can be, because I mean, we're basically indoctrinated from the time we're born to the time we die. But yeah, like all these things, like I had to grow up and do the things that make my parents happy, or like I'm the black sheep of the family, or like all of this shit. Like just break it down, figure out what you really believe, what you really should be doing with your life, and then fuck the rest, man. Like even if we're going off the assumption like nothing matters, this is a one-shot deal. Even if you don't believe in anything after this, you don't believe anything matters. Like let's say you're like the most nihilistic person in the world. Like to me, okay, so nothing matters. I might as well do whatever the fuck I want to do and enjoy this life, right? You know, but I mean, yeah, obviously, I guess that could be taken the wrong way too for people that like go full Grand Theft Auto with it. But I mean, I think a lot of other people would let go of a lot of their like inhibitions, their like anxieties and like all of this kind of shit and just be real with each other.
Yeah, well, the thing is like that experience can be difficult to contend with, and like you said, there's going to be people that want to take advantage of it, and yeah, since we haven't said it yet, that's the human condition. Like I said, we find these systems or we create these systems, and the natural instinct is for humans, at least anyway, is to find a way to cheat the system. How can I benefit from this? How can I make money from this? How can I get more than everyone else? When we don't really need these things, like really all that we need is enough to get through, but we think that we need to stockpile these things, even if it goes against, you know, the very concept of what it is that we're trying to do here, to our own detrimental, existence, right? We will, hunt something to extinction, right? Why? Well, because we're fucking greedy, right? And I think that this is something that we need to take into account when we look at these things. However, what I will say is that, as we discussed a little bit earlier, is that the material itself has its means of overriding that. Like I said, my friend who continued to try to have this like experience with methyltryptamine got locked out. He was like, "No, you're not allowed to anymore." Um, I myself have also hit a point of what I call it 0 point, um, and it's kind of like, if you traced everything back through, if Big Bang is what you believe in, okay, trace it back to the point of the Big Bang, there was technically nothing, right? You can push yourself so far that you hit that 0 point and you don't get anything else. Now, if you're doing that time and time again, you have to realize that it's not healthy, it's not helpful, you're not actually achieving anything. The only thing you're trying to do is, for whatever reason, like for my friend, it was ego. He wanted to be able to say like, "Oh, I've done it more than anyone else, and I've had more experience. I'm the best. I've had more than anyone else." Right? That was his thing, which is why I got locked out. For me, I was like, I want to see more, because usually what happens to me is I'll get to the end of the experience, and the being that I'm interacting with says, "Okay, it's time for you to go back." And I'm like, "No, I want more." He's like, "Well, you can't have more. Right? Go back." No, I want some more. You have to go back, right? Next time, right? And here's the other thing as well. Like in one of my experiences, the being that I was interacting with, which I'm pretty sure was myself. Like, I don't know, I'm still so like of two minds, but there was this alien being I was interacting with, and when I said like, "No, I want to stay," I only just really started communicating with you properly, and he's like, "Dude, you're here all the time. You just don't remember. Just it's okay," kind of thing. And off I went back to reality. But these kinds of things, like we have this. It's the human condition is to like want more, to try and get more, to try to take advantage. And as far as I'm aware, the only thing that has a failsafe is this material. Everything else can be abused, but this, I don't know, it has the ability to evade our attempts to control it.
Yeah, but this. I think this ties back with what Chu was talking about earlier, right? Like, are we meant to control it? I mean, I think this kind of like goes back to the you're gonna get what you need thing, right? Like, you can't
Yeah.
always get what you want, but
Mhm.
yeah, no, I mean, I think that's the exact thing, right? Like, even those people that are like super controlling and they get frustrated, right? Because like, well, this is pointless. I didn't get what I wanted, etc. I think that's a lesson in and of itself, right? And maybe you don't learn the lesson, right? Like, maybe it's not time for you to learn that lesson, but you'll learn it another way.
Mm.
Hopefully it's not like a really horrible, miserable way, but that's the thing. Like, we don't control how we learn these things. And from my
Yeah.
experience, the things that feel like they're going to completely break and destroy you, or in some cases, maybe they do, those are the things where you get these like breakthrough experiences, and it finally makes fucking sense. Like, I've been banging my head on this wall for 20 years, and neither side gave, and like all of a sudden I just broke through like the fucking Kool-Aid man, and yeah, oh yeah, it all makes sense now. Yeah, I mean, it is what it is, right? Like, you get what you need when you need it, and
Yeah.
sure, you can go around chasing everything you think you need, but like, that's another lesson in itself, right? Like, we don't control the universe. The universe controls itself. It works just fine with or without us, and I don't know. My opinion is that we were very much along for the ride, and
Mm.
I think
Yeah.
that's the biggest takeaway for me for all of this is like, enjoy it for what it is, and don't try to force anything to be anything it ain't.
Hmm. And as far as like the bad trips
Integration
go,
is a I think
go for it, Chip.
integration is an important point to bring up here as well, because I mean you can set your intentions for ayahuasca and what you want to get out of it. And I've read there's like a blogger, or she's a shaman. She used to work at Rhythmia, but now she does like um, kind of like post ayahuasca sort of stuff for people that are trying to make sense of what they experience. But the integration is really important. And so you might not get what you want at the time. Like ayahuasca, she says that ayahuasca gives you 20% what you want, 80% what she wants to give you. And so you can ask for something and you might not get it then, but you may get it. I've had this, I've had my intentions given to me in like ceremonies, or I've got them doing something else, like either in shamanic journeying on my own, or even just doing yoga or anything. I could be just going for a walk, and I'm like, oh, that's what that was, you know?
Yeah.
So, I think it's important to take that in consideration as well. Is that you might
Mm.
like all my intentions that I've set in ayahuasca, I have got, but I haven't always got them when or how I thought they would be delivered.
Yeah. Well, in sort of like relation to that as well, something that I found interesting was after my first experience, because like until the point you have the experience, you don't really know what you're in for, what you're going to get, what it's like. Once you've had the experience, there's a lot of takeaways that you get from that first experience. One of them was it's going to sound weird, but it's like the taste of dimethyltryptamine, right? Which like I'm not talking about like the smoked taste in your mouth. I'm talking about like knowing when you are having um, elevated levels of dimethyltryptamine in your body. And after this first experience, I was going through life and having interaction, like pleasant experiences with particular things, and going like, "Oh man, this is awesome! It feels like like I'm on another level, kind of thing." And I'm just like, "This is I can taste the dimethyltryptamine in me." Right, because I'm getting close to sort of like elevated levels of it, and this is something that I think we need to comprehend as well. Is like this material isn't foreign; it is within our bodies. It's something that's inside of us, and we interact with it in a number of different ways. As I was saying before, with schizophrenics, they have elevated levels of it. Um, so it's something that we need to be aware of, because we don't need to have this shortcut of, whether it's ayahuasca, whether it's smoked dimethyltryptamine or any other means of interacting with it. If you want to lick frogs or toads, actually, feel free, go for it. 5-MeO-DMT, right? But anyway, being aware of when we release it naturally is something we need to be aware of, because it does play a part in our everyday experience. So keeping that in mind, if we find that we have this, like I said, for me, it's a taste. It's like I can taste it. I know that if I go through these experiences, if I do these particular things, I can naturally bring out an elevated level of dimethyltryptamine in my body without having to take substances. Because, like, let's be real here. Like, if we could do it without having to sort of like bring something into the body that's foreign, it'd be much better for us, right? Because we'd be closer to that level of self-awareness and self-understanding. So after I had the first experience, when I start interacting with other things and I feel it, I taste it. It's weird to say that I taste it, but that's kind of like the only thing I can relate it to. It's ineffable, unfortunately. So I start doing those things more often. So then I can have a more natural state of this interaction with this material, as opposed to having to import it into my body every time I feel I need to interact with it.
Yep. So, I don't know. Anything. So, obviously, like, getting past the ayahuasca, you said you've been doing some, just like some spiritual journeys too, right, Chu? What's that entail?
Yeah, so I did in Bali, I did like a 7-day silent retreat, which it wasn't Vipassana, which is the one that most people um, who do these kind of long meditations are familiar with. And it was very similar in the style, but it was more focused on using the mind to heal the body, whereas I think Vipassana has less of a focus on that. But I haven't actually done Vipassana, so I can't speak to that experience directly. But so again, I mean, it's about going in, like going inwards, and it's sort of like I don't want to use the term facing your demons, but that kind of thing. And just like going inwards and seeing what comes up and seeing what needs to be dealt with and released. And at the end of that, like it was a really good experience. I liked it a lot. And seriously, like silence is awesome. Like just not talking to anybody for, well, it was 5 days of actual silence. It was like a really amazing experience. And it just made me realize like how much crap we all talk all the time. But when we did our testimony, like I was listening to some of the people, and no one else had done any kind of plant medicines at all. And the experiences that they were having, I was like, fuck, this is what happens when you're on ayahuasca. Like they were this very similar kinds of experiences. And so it really made me think, okay, well, you don't need to do plant medicines to have this kind of like deep breakthrough in understanding yourself. So that was the first one. And then I did some shamanism courses, and I did 4 courses over 11 days. So it was like introduction to shamanism, which was journeying, which I already knew how to do, but I did learn some new stuff. Kind of getting power animals, journeying for other people to ask questions. So that just means like connecting with your helper spirits. So again, it's like this just breaking through to the transcendent realm, the other side, but without the plant medicines. Like you're just doing it, journeying. And then after that, we did a course in extractions. So that was because we don't just have these physical bodies, like we have emotional bodies, we have the the energetic body, the meridian body, like depending on which school of thought you kind of buy into. There's all these other subtle bodies that we can't see, and so we have all these like negative, I don't want to say entities, but negative attachments, like negative things, like hitting our energetic bodies all the time. So it's kind of like learning how to identify them and extract them. And again, it's not you doing it; it's spirit working through you to do it. And then the third course was psychopomp, which is basically um, finding ghosts. And there's, because people don't die properly anymore either, because organized religion basically got rid of all the shamans about 500 years ago. And now people, when they die, there's like we have a real fear of dying. We have a real fear of hell, whether or not you believe in hell or not. I mean, a lot of people kind of get stuck there on these religious beliefs um, because the medical tech industry has extended life. It's also extended death, which means more and more people are dying under the influence of sedation. So, not just like drug overdoses, but like actual prescription drug overdoses to manage pain at the end. So, there's all these ghosts kind of wandering around, and they shouldn't be in this plane because they affect the energy levels of the living humans. There's no shamans anymore. Well, there aren't many to like cross them over. So we kind of learned how to do that. And then the last one was soul retrieval. So obviously we all have souls, because if we don't have our soul, it means we've died. But we lose parts of our soul through trauma, through fear, basically events that happen in our lives, throughout our lives. And so we have parts of our soul, conscious, kind of out there, and we want to bring that back to make us more whole so we can make better decisions. And so we learn how to go and find those soul pieces and bring them back to people. So yeah, that's kind of the path that I'm on at the moment, is exploring those shamanic practices.
Well, something that I wanted to sort of like jump in there with, as far as like talking about like the soul and that kind of thing. Soul is the spiritual side of things. Is as far as the sciences go, it's consciousness. And what I believe, at least anyway, through my research, is that what spirituality or religion calls the soul is what science calls consciousness. So if there's discrepancy, people are just like, oh, soul and ghosts, that's rubbish, kind of thing. Just keep in mind here that we're talking about the same thing. You can't deny consciousness, because we all have consciousness. That is something that exists in every single one of us.
Wait,
Consciousness
are you
exists in
sure?
everything, like
Are,
it's everywhere.
are you sure, Cove?
Yeah.
Are you sure everyone has it?
Well, if we want to get into like the semantics of the situation, if I punched you in the head hard enough, or you punched me in the head hard, I'm not promoting violence, just so everyone knows. You can become unconscious, but as far as your consciousness goes, that's still part of like your mental awareness, like who you are as a person, that kind of thing. And even if you lose your memory and that kind of thing, you still have that sense of I'm me, right? And this is the thing that we're talking about here, is essentially people who have trouble comprehending when people talk about soul and spirit and that kind of thing, the scientific terminology. I'm not saying that one's right, one's wrong, but what I tend to sort of like lean to is the spirituality and science are two sides of the same coin. And essentially, like when spirituality comes and says something, science sort of like steps up and says, well, how can we verify this? How can we put some kind of quantitative evaluation on this situation so we can explain what's going on here? Now, unfortunately, when it comes to the sciences, and feel free to look this up on your own, is we have no means of explaining what consciousness is. We can't even find where it is in the body. It's like, where does it live? How can we weigh it? How can we measure it? There's no means of doing so. Therefore, like, science is not adequately equipped to be able to comment or do anything about the fact that we have consciousness, but we can't deny that it exists. So anybody that's sort of like struggling with this whole spirit kind of thing, consciousness is the same thing, and we can't deny that it exists. So what we're talking about is what happens to the consciousness after it's done being here, right? And that's where we lean into sort of like I think it was like, what is it, like 4 grams, 15 grams, something like that. There was a movie that was made about like the weight of the soul or some shit like that.
I think
And
it's 20. Yeah, I think
okay,
it's
there
20
you go.
grams.
Yeah. And that's the kind of thing where it's kind of like, well, we can't explain it, but it exists. So until we can sort of like, put our finger on it and say something definitively about it, well, it is what it is. But we can't deny that it exists. So the question is, what happens? What is it? How does it work? It's all up in the air. So it's open for debate as far as I'm concerned.
I think part of the problem as well is because we exist in this third dimensional reality and all our scientific methods are 3D methods. And we're talking about like fifth dimension and higher um, concept. So we can't measure them because we don't have that 5D technology. We're dealing with 3D technology. And of course, we're not going to be able to detect something in the 5D because it doesn't exist in this reality. But that's not to say it's not true. And we
Yeah.
know, what is it, the thing in Switzerland? Is it the Hadron Collider or
Hadron
whatever it
Collider.
is?
Yeah.
I mean, that proved last year that there is a fourth dimension. Didn't really make the news, but they proved that there is a fourth dimension. It's a fourth dimension, that obviously opens the door up to being other dimensions. And if you've done these plant medicines or you're highly connected to spirit anyway, like you know that there's other beings out there. And just because we can't see them in this 3D reality and we can't detect them with our 3D technology, it doesn't mean they don't exist.
Something that I'd like to lean on there for this kind of thing, because like and I'm sure you may have interacted with some people like this too, is like when you start talking about these things, they're like, oh well, science says this and you don't know anything, and science is right. Unfortunately, what these people don't understand is that science is a very raw tool. It's not a very good tool, but it's the best tool that we've got. And the best means of sort of like trying to exemplify this is if we look at the visual spectrum. Now, we see only 3 colors. That's like as far as like rods and cones in the eyes and that kind of thing. The cones can only see 3 colors. And when we look at that as far as the spectrum, this is what we can understand. I'm going to post this in the chat space here. It pops up there. That's about as much as what we can see, right? And the thing is this is what we call a spectrum, right? But it's really a continuum. A spectrum has a limit at one end or the other. A continuum means that it keeps going, right? So if this is just one sense that we have, and we have like a lot of people, we have X amount of senses. It continues to grow, the amount of senses that we have. We just don't, understand how much we can sense. But this is putting on a rules and regulations of how limited our senses are, and we think that reality can only exist in what we can see or feel with the senses, which is bullshit. There's plenty of other shit like beyond that, and we have no means of understanding or comprehending what exists within those realms. Besides, okay, we invent technology to help us see beyond the ultraviolet and infrared spectrum. It's fantastic, but we don't see with that all the time. If we were walking around with, X-ray vision or gamma ray vision or cosmic ray vision, right? We may see a bunch of shit that we cannot explain, right? But unfortunately, in this particular existence that we live in, we use X-rays to check if bones are broken and that kind of shit. We don't walk around with X-ray vision all the time. So we need to understand that our senses are very limited, and there can be life that exists beyond our senses' capability of detection, regardless of whatever technology we attach to that to enhance it. And that's something that can be very difficult for human beings to comprehend, because we don't like to think that we have information that we don't understand or we don't know, and that kind of thing. So the first thing we need to do is get over ourselves and understand that there is more beyond the human experience. Once we grasp and grapple that, we will be open to this other information or new information that comes in, and be able to at least accept that there could be something else beyond their own existence.
Well, I think one of the big problems here is that we have a very antiquated way of like kind of thinking about or maybe like quantifying these things, right? Like time is one that I know you and I have gone over a lot, and like one thing that I'm firmly convinced of is time is extremely subjective, right? The only thing that I can tell you I firmly believe about time is that now is the only time that ever exists. The path, like the past, is a thought form that we create to remember events. The future is a thought form that we use to, every variation of planning or theorizing or fretting, fearing over what could happen. But the only time it ever is now, because we cannot exist in any other time other than right now. But like whenever we're getting into things with like color, for example, right? Like color, sound, all energy is ultimately a frequency. And I think that's the thing to really remember here, because frequency means that instead of going like Roy G. Biv, right? Like red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, violet, like these are the only colors. It's like, no, there's an infinite frequency of colors just between those handful of colors, right? Like every single tick in a degree of a frequency is a change. And yeah, just like that diagram showing, like our visible spectrum is so limited. And I think another thing to really keep in mind too is like whenever we develop these tools to see things like ultraviolet or infrared, we're not actually seeing them. What we're seeing is a visual representation that is within our, realm of basically like ability to see, and it's adapting what we use machines or tools to tell us is going on in these other things. And in something like infrared, it's really good because you can see like body heat in the dark, or like you can keep food warm with it without like blinding everybody. But yeah, I mean, I think that's something to really keep in mind is there's so much outside of the realm of our senses and so much outside of our realm of basically just like indoctrinated learning, that we're told like this is how it is, blah, 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 accept it. And, so much of this I think really ties back to understanding that the foundation of science is not about proving anything. It's about what you can disprove. We make theories, we accept them until we can disprove them. I would even say like what we were talking about last week with like the with gravity, right? Like that only exists until we disprove it. And I mean that's anything else. Relativity only exists until we disprove it. Like I think taking anything at like face value as the only permanent answer that will ever exist is a huge misconception. And I think it's something that if you go to the public indoctrination camps, for sure, like you're very much ingrained, like memorize what's in this book, regurgitate it, and if you can tell me exactly what I told you well enough, then you pass. Well, that's not learning. That's memorizing bullshit. Like, to understand this kind of stuff, to like really be able to get a grasp on it, you have to get some kind of like hands-on interaction with it. And I think you also have to be willing to question fucking everything. Like, just accepting all of this shit at face value is literally how you turn into a like quote-unquote sheeple, Like, that's my biggest gripe with the way education currently works, is so much of it's about indoctrination. And I think like whenever people get into college, it's very obvious like, who are the people that never really learned how to like think and figure out shit on their own and just like memorize their textbooks. Because whenever you get into college, it starts to kind of move into that direction to where you have to start, getting like a lot more abstract, and you have to start learning how to think critically. And yeah, there are some of those professors that kind of stick with the high school method, but on the whole, it definitely requires you to like kind of like branch out, especially like the higher you get into education. Or even if taking the school system out of the equation, like just learning something that you're really interested in, like the further and further you go, I think like the more abstract these things get and the more wiggly you realize it all is, right? Like the people that tell you they know everything there is to know about something and like this, they got an answer to everything, to me, like those are often the people that know the least. Like because they're so convinced that everything they know is right, they're not willing to question anything anymore.
Yeah, well, one of the things that I like to say is that science is what we think we know right now. And that's about as far as like science is willing to commit to. Because when we really look at what science is, it doesn't actually say anything. It just says, what we think we know right now. And that's, subjective to change based on evidence that's brought forward. And it has to be empirical evidence, etc. But, the takeaway from this is that science isn't set in stone. There's no unequivocal truth. And the sooner we can accept that, the sooner we can move towards, I've said this multiple times in the past. Human beings are on the top of the food chain, not because we are, better at a whole bunch of different things. Like, we don't have claws, we don't have teeth, you don't have fur. There's a whole bunch of shit. Like, technically, if we wrote down all our skills and compared them to everything else, like lions and bears and that kind of thing, like we're pretty shithouse, eh? Right? When it comes down to it, like we're not very well equipped to deal with the world that we live in. But somehow we managed to get on top. Why is that? It's because we're adaptable, because we can shift, because we can change. Right? If shit's cold, we kill something, we put a fur on us, and we stay warm. We should die, but we stay warm, etc., etc. And having an understanding of like this means that we need to understand that we're adaptable. That is our superpower. That's the reason why we're on top, is because we're adaptable. Now, if we're not willing to adapt, particularly when it comes to sciences, and keep that open mind, then we're kind of like failing at what we're here to do and what we're really good at. Unfortunately, the human condition means that we like to stay comfortable, and comfortable means not challenging our thoughts and opinions because we have cognitive dissonance and that kind of thing. But anyway, leading to a little bit of homework here, I'm going to chuck something into the chat, which I sent to Ron earlier today. It's in regards to something we were talking about on Ron's show, but it does exemplify exactly what it is that I'm talking about here, which is the scientific community, how it works, and how it's sort of like a club that you want to get into and you want to be part of. And, it means kind of like making sure that the status quo is kept in place and that kind of thing. And you want to make sure you're saying the same thing as everyone else. And that means that we don't progress as quickly as what we should. We don't make discoveries as quickly as we should. We don't accept these discoveries as quickly as what we should. And, I think what it comes down to is being open as a species to these things that are beyond our understanding, right? Whether it's visual spectrum, whether it's any other sense that we have, whether it's things that we don't even have senses for. Because how are we going to explain this? Like if someone couldn't smell, how would you explain the smell of something to them? Right? They don't have the sense to be able to do so. And even if we did develop the technology to be able to give them an understanding of what smell was via written information, would they really have the understanding of what a smell of something is if they don't have the sense to do so? It's kind of like what I'm leaning on here is, the fact that we don't know shit and we should be open to this information as it comes in, whether it's spiritual shit, whether it's anything else, instead of discarding it as being rubbish, like, oh, there's a ghost in my room. Oh, let's just crazy people talk about ghosts. Like, let's just look at it and go, okay, well, let's investigate. Let's see what we can find evidence wise. Let's see what we can do and try and be open to shifting our mindset from things that are not the air quotes norm. Because the sooner that we do that, the sooner that we become open to evolve to the next level of whatever human beings are going to be, in 10 years, 50 years, 100 years from now. That's what we want to move towards and not stay stagnant in the situation that we're in right now, which is pretty much sticking to what we think we know when it's not accurate.
Yeah, and again, I usually mention this, but I try to know as little as possible. What about you, Chu? Do you know a lot?
I know some things, but I'm kind of tying all this together and with ayahuasca as well. I mean, I agree that time as we know it in this linear form only exists in this reality, and everything else outside of 3D exists in the now. So everything that has existed or exists in our kind of past, present, future is already out there. So everything is known already. And it's kind of like what Cope said. If we, we have to get out of, our current beliefs to move forward. But then if you tie back that to the like journeying, for example, I mean, you could journey and try to find out something about the future, but you might just hear, ooh, because we are not ready in this time period now in this 3D to know something in the future, even though it already exists in another dimension. And it's like going back 2000 years and giving someone an iPad. They wouldn't know how to use it. But outside of this dimension, the iPad already exists. Like it's just like it kind of like spins your head after a while when you try and think about it. But it's really interesting.
So,
Yeah, the example that I put forward is usually if I took a lighter, a very simple tool that we have available anywhere. Like if you walk into any shop, you could probably get a lighter in some way, shape, or form. But if we took that to the Neanderthals, right, and we showed them a lighter, right, they would call it sorcery, right? How could it be that this
Yeah,
person can
exactly.
create this fire, right, from this thing? It's magic, right? Because they don't understand it. But to us in our reality and that kind of thing, it's very simple. Like we have a particular material that's mixed with another material with the flint, and look, it's very simple for us. But for them, it's so complex that they don't understand it. And of course, it turns into this. You could have like people starting religions for this. The religion of lighters, right? And that's the comical thing about it is we think like giving that example to people, they're like, well, yeah, of course, because lighters exist. But if we project that into the future and go, okay, well, in the future, we could be able to project our consciousness across the universe. That's rubbish, right? Like we think that these kinds of mental experiments are ridiculous and not worth exploring, even though we can sort of like retrofit this and go like, well, yeah, we understand it looking backwards, but we don't understand it looking forwards. And this is what I'm getting at is the sooner that we can understand that looking forward, there's shit that we don't understand and is not going to make sense to us. And that's okay. And the sooner we can embrace that, the sooner we'll start making the strides that we need to become, better as far as like, human beings on the planet are involved. And maybe we'll have that, because we're all talking about like, when will we find life somewhere else? We may find it in other planets, but we may also find it in other dimensions.
Well, I think it exists in both. I think, I mean, I believe that there are ETs here around us now, and there are ETs on other planets, dimensions on other planets. So we go there and we can't see them because we're in our 3D reality, and they're living in a 5D, 6D, 10D, whatever. I don't know how many dimensions there are, but they're there now. We just can't
Yeah,
see them.
it's
Unless
funny you
you
say that.
lift the veil, like with ayahuasca, or you're
Mhm.
very spiritually connected.
Yeah. Well, it's funny you say that too, because like I read an article like a while. I haven't written stuff in Steemit for a while, but anyway, a while back I wrote an article regarding so like multiple dimensions and how they can exist like right here and now, but we can't actually see them because essentially like they're beyond our realm of understanding. And even to the point where multiple universes can exist. Like my universe has particular traits, and your universes have different traits. So, like you don't like drinking alcohol. I like drinking alcohol. So, alcohol is really cool in my universe. In your universe, it's like, I can take it or leave it. There are differences, even subjectively, that can create multiple universes on the same plane of existence. So, if we start taking that into other levels and different planes, 4D, 5D, 6D, that kind of thing. If we actually think about it on that level, it's sort of like mind-boggling to try and comprehend the fact that we could have so many different types of life forms existing on various frequencies of existence, but we just can't see it. Like I may be sitting right next to another being right now, but I can't see them because they're on a different frequency of existence. You know what I mean?
What if you're
Yeah,
sitting next
exactly.
to infinite variations of yourself right now, Cope?
That's it.
But
That's it.
so choose something we've talked about on here before. I don't know if you ever heard of retrocausality?
I'm not sure.
Okay, so
Remind
basically,
me.
if you're operating from the belief that now is the only time that really exists, right? Like the only time that we can really perceive or exist in. A good way to understand retrocausality would be that the past can influence and change the future, and the future can influence and change the past. And where these two things meet up is the present, the now, where we exist. And there's like a few scientific experiments Cope and I like to point out from time to time. Like one of them is the double slit experiment that proves like basically the very act of observing something has the ability to change it and alter it in some kind of way. And
Yeah, I've seen that. Yeah, I've seen that.
right, so and then when we get into retrocausality, like a prime example that I usually throw out there to like kind of give people an example here is like if you think about like a past relationship, right? Like let's say you think about something that like completely like crushed you or devastated you at the time, like you couldn't wrap your mind around it. But like over time, like as self awareness grows, like you learn more about things. It can very much change like your understanding, your view of this past event, and like ultimately your past changes because your perception, your understanding, and your perspective of it all has shifted. So going from the mindset of the now is the only time that I ever really exist, I think it really helps to like kind of understand the concept of retrocausality because we can understand that like as we grow we change, like our understanding of everything can like shift. Then the events that happened in our past change, right? And then as these things change they can also alter the things that happen in the future because like like let's say like from your past event it would dictate like, okay, well, I'm never going to do that again, or like I'll never speak to that person again, or like maybe you think like that person's like the most evil motherfucker that ever existed, whatever, right? But as your perspective and everything shifts, your understanding of that past event changes, and that also changes what like the future events that you would ever consider. So, like, is this making any sense to you?
Yes, it does. I've dabbled in some ancestral clearing as well while I've been doing shamanic journeying, and basically, that is going back. It's said that events can affect 7 generations past and 7 generations forward, and so generally there are 9 ancestral karmic stories which may be experienced like down the line, and usually you can think of something if like addiction runs through your family or abandonment or abuse or something. There's a good chance that something happened in the past to one of your ancestors. So the 9 stories are abandonment, addiction, abuse, shame, betrayal, violence, grief, illness, and poverty. So there's something that's happened in the past around one of your ancestors that has then not been resolved within their lifetime, and then that's been carried through up until someone like me, for example, in my family, has journeyed, tried to clear some of that ancestral karma. And what happens is you go back, because we have free will. So assuming that you believe in, like the spirits are still around somewhere, that we're basically eternal souls. So they're still there, but they don't have physical bodies, so they don't have free will. So they they can't themselves. So they need us, the actual living generation, to do it. So if you go back and clear an ancestral story in your line, you can acknowledge what has happened in the past and then clear that for your family. And what it's supposed to do is then it changes from generations, 7 generations going forward, and well, whatever generations there are going forward, and also whatever has happened in the past back to whatever ancestor that occurred with. So I've done a bit, but I haven't seen if some things have played out in my family yet, but I also haven't seen all of my family since I've been back. But I've definitely heard of it changing other people's basic family dynamic and family stories just by going back into the past and changing something that happened several generations ago. So it's super interesting. So I get where you're coming from.
Yep. And see, right now, what's happening is Cope went back into the past and basically turned Australia into hell, and I think we're now seeing the consequences.
I did nothing of the sort.
Are
No,
you saying Cope started all the bush?
I don't know. I'm not saying he didn't. If that, I think that's fair. I'm not saying he didn't start them all.
He didn't start the fire.
It was
Oh,
always
God.
burning since the world's been turning.
Oh, that's your story, and you're sticking to it.
Man,
Yeah.
no, like, okay, so as an aside, like, I guess, getting away from, like, the woo-woo philosophy a little bit, yeah, I guess, like, this is
That's
something.
the fun stuff, Clay.
Oh, yeah, no, I totally agree. I just don't want people to think, like, I'm making a complete joke out of this, because, like, this is something that I have been seeing, like, happening like more and more over the last few years in California. Is like we're having like more and more of these like crazy wildfires that just like burn and like they wipe out like, you know, like entire neighborhoods. Like they're literally scorched earth. And man, like looking at that map of the upside down earlier, man, that looks rough. Like, I mean, one thing I've
Now,
learned about Australia is like basically going around the outside rim is where all the people are, and dude, like that's where it looks like all the fucking fires are.
well, look, the thing that is very interesting about that is essentially like when we talk to the Aboriginals, the elders, and that kind of thing, they know this shit, right? And they've been telling people for a long motherfucking time, right? And we can call it ancient knowledge, if you will. That what you need to do is create organized fires to get rid of the scrub, the rubbish, the foliage, if you will, from the trees and that kind of stuff. Now, Australia, in its eternal wisdom, just goes around and prevents the fires all the time. And what we have to understand here is that essentially what we're doing is pouring more and more and more and more fuel into this big tin that we say is never going to catch fire until it does. And when it does, it's a big ass motherfucking fire because we've been storing this shit for a long motherfucking time. And it hurts. Whereas if we actually listen to the elders, and again, this is like going back to ancient knowledge, whether you're talking about shamans, whether you're talking about like, it doesn't matter. There's people that have lived with the land, not trying to dominate it, but have lived with the land for a certain amount of time. They know how it works. They know what goes on, and they're sitting there telling these people in power, the people that have the ability to change things and do things, and saying, "Hey, listen, just so you know." If you don't do this shit, there's going to be bad shit that happens. And they're like, you don't know anything. You're just like some old people. It's old ways. And you don't understand the new ways. We have technology that stops things and all that kind of stuff. The old school shit doesn't matter anymore until
But the
everything
new school
catches
shit
fire.
the new school shit doesn't matter either. I mean, if you look at this article that I just posted, like all the methods that we've been using to work out where fires are going, it's all out the window now because like they're creating their own weather systems and these fire tornadoes and everything. And so you just like it's completely new and they can't predict anything, which is why they're going, this is catastrophic and evacuate because we're not coming in to save you because we don't know we can't predict what this fire is doing.
Everybody has to escape to the outback. Going full Crocodile Dundee, boys. Let's go.
Get out into the
Well,
desert.
the crocodiles are only on the coast in the north, so and there's no fires up there, I don't think, at the moment. Well, at least there wasn't 2 weeks ago when I was up there. So yeah, maybe like get on a plane to Cairns, go there, and then try your luck with the crocodiles. Just don't go in the ocean; you'll be all
But I think what I'm getting at here is the fact that we think that with our technology we're so much smarter and better than thousands of years of dealing with this shit. And this is the sort of like the ego getting involved, the ignorance, if you will, of those younger. It's probably the best way to put it, like the younger mentality, because it's not that there isn't young people that have the knowledge passed on to them, but it's the people that kind of like think like, the old school stuff, that's old, right? We don't need that anymore. That's rubbish. That's old, kind of thing. Whereas there's quite a lot that we can learn. I'm trying to find this article right now of this person who was taught the ways of the elder Aboriginals and that kind of thing in the past, and he was talking on an SBS program, basically saying like, this is something that we know about, that we've been telling government about for decades, for generations, that what we need to do is, instead of like just preventing the fires and letting the fuel build up, which is what I was saying a minute ago, is essentially go through and quite frequently go through setting fires to burn the fuel that creates this inferno. Because if you remove the fuel, like every season, then when these things do happen, it's not as detrimental to the people around, because there's not as much fuel to burn. So it burns for a little bit and then it goes out. It's not on fire for an entire quarter, because essentially, Chew, I'm not sure if you've heard the same thing, but what I've heard is that essentially there's going to be fires all summer and maybe a little bit further onwards.
Yeah,
because the
these
fuel is there.
bushfires are going for months.
Yeah, it's because
Well,
they
they
have fuel
can't
to
put them
burn.
out. Yeah, and they
Yeah.
can't put them out. Like they're too out of control now. Like basically, we just need rain. The rain is the only way they're going to stop, and they're just going to keep on burning until the rain, one day, hopefully.
Yeah, so we have to pray on, some kind of godly intervention, even though we don't believe in God because we're all scientists. And our science can't help us. And this is what I'm saying. Like, sometimes we have to lean on our history, our elders, and just go, okay, well, they know shit, right? We may be smart with our smartphones, and we can look up the temperature and where the fire is right now, but that didn't stop the fire from happening in the first place. Technology can't do that, right? Whereas if we look at the elders and that kind of thing, they'll turn around and say, well, yeah, we need to do this to prevent this. And if we ignore that, then we have to deal with the repercussions. And right now, what we're doing is dealing with repercussions, which is unfortunate, but it could have been prevented.
And I don't think this necessarily just pertains to fire, right? I know I talked about this at least once. It's not something I get into a lot, but for those of you that don't know, like basically the whole state where I live went underwater in 2016, and you know what? It was the science that was very much designed to prevent this from happening that ultimately enabled it. Basically, there's an intricate system of levees put in by the Army Corps of Engineers that basically are supposed to be utilized to open up floodplains that in the end would prevent what I can only describe as a fishbowl for the entire state, because a large chunk of our state, like the majority of it, is actually below sea level. And if you've ever been to New Orleans, New Orleans is actually surrounded.
I have, surprisingly.
Yeah, so if you're flying into New Orleans from the south, you can actually see there's this giant levee system that's built up, and they also have these big giant like fucking forged metal gates like out in the Gulf. And all of these things basically work together to like break water, prevent the storm surge from like coming and flooding New Orleans. There's also like an intricate levee system that pumps water out, and this is how New Orleans survives hurricanes. But it's not just New Orleans. Like the entire state has these levee systems built for. If you're familiar with the Mississippi River, it's one of the largest rivers in the world, and it is used to basically travel throughout most of the central U.S. Whenever there's like heavy rainfall up north, like all this stuff like washes downwards, right? So in 2016, there was like crazy amounts of water, and it was going like all over, feeding into all the tributaries that lead into the Mississippi, and it was all coming our way. And there was like all this like public cry for the governor to open up the spillways, open up the floodgates. Like basically, we knew that there was a fuck ton of water coming, and we needed to prepare. Well, for whatever reason, he decided to not open these floodgates and not open these spillways. And what happened is we essentially had all of these levee systems working to hold water in, just like what you could consider like a giant fishbowl, because all of this built up land and this like gate system and everything is built up. But once the water is in, it's just holding it in there, right? So like the whole thing is you have to utilize this stuff to stop it from getting in, or this happens. And for whatever reason, he didn't make the call, and the whole state went underwater. Like I want to say, where I live, I've never seen it flood. Like I've never seen it flood once, and for like about a week straight, there was like 6+ feet of water. Like the place that I was living went under. That like my parents' house is kind of like I guess up on like a hill almost, so like the water went around it. But yeah, like if the water would have gotten like even a foot higher, it would have been in their house. I mean, like just because we think like scientifically we can control all this stuff, like the fires, the floods, like the universe will send us clear signs that we don't control everything. And like all of our planning and like all of our ways of like convincing ourselves that we've like outsmarted the natural order of things, and we're the fucking like apex geniuses that control the universe, we're gonna get reminders that we don't. But yeah, we're pulling up here on the ass end of the show, and I don't know if Chew's familiar or not, but Cope and I had this thing where for the last like 30 seconds or so, we make a bunch of weird noises. Chew, have you ever made weird noises before?
Yes, but not on the radio show.
What are you trying to say, Chew?
I feel like I'm being led into a trap here.
Oh no! Well, no. Like everybody does it. Like Azaria loves making weird noises. Like all 7 of them, she knows all 7 of the sounds, so she likes to make them. Yeah, and it's this thing that Cope and I do every week, and usually, like we invite the guests to join in. And, I mean, I'm not saying you have to make weird noises. It might be a little weird if Cope and I are just making all these weird noises, and I mean, I don't know.
You'd be used to just you two doing it.
Oh, yeah, for sure. But, I mean, I didn't want to, like, not invite you to join it. You know what I'm saying?
Well, look, one time we got everybody in the audience unmuted, and, Clay was killing himself laughing because he was hearing some snoring from a person who's no longer in the audience right now. So I guess it's not going to be embarrassing for them. But they were snoring, and Clay found it hilarious, and his crazy ass noise was laughing.
I couldn't help it, man. I could not stop laughing.
So what are the noises?
Okay,
whatever you feel like. All right, it's interpretive dance, but with your mouth.
Okay, look, everybody say goodbye, and Chew's gonna find out what the weird noises are very soon. So, shamalama ding dong, episode whatever, much love.
Yeah, dingo baby, shrimp on a barbie, have a VB, and a pack of winnies.
Thanks for having me on the show.